welcome everyone to the second installation of our study of the 10 utterances. And tonight it's my responsibility, challenge, and pleasure to introduce to you the first three utterances or commandments. But before I begin, I want to open with our traditional blessing for studying sacred text. The blessing says, Baruch atah ya Eloheinu chei ha'olamim, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. It says, blessed are you, Holy One, Spirit that enlivens this world, who makes us holy and brings us close through your guidance. And one of those injunctions or one of those guidances is to engage in the study of Torah, which means to engage in wisdom. The Hebrew word la'asok, to engage or to work with, sounds a lot like soaking. So our beloved friend of blessed memory, Rabbi Arthur Wasco, used to interpret this as that God inspires us to soak in the words of Torah. So that's what we're going to be doing this evening together. So the first three utterances, the very first one, and these are all from chapter 20 of the book of Exodus, right? It begins with, I am Yud He Vav He, your God. I am the eternal your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, the house of bondage. That's the first commandment as we count them. So the older Jewish commentators count this as the first positive commandment, the obligation to know that God exists. It's not merely a preamble. See, in some readings, I think as the Christians will read the scriptures, they'll read this as a preamble. For us, it's an active command to affirm the existence of God, the existence of divinity. And there are others who emphasize the phrase, who brought you out of Egypt. So God is identifying God's self through relationship and history, not abstract theology. Following the instructions then, all those other instructions that follow, we're going to do that out of a sense of gratitude to this Holy One who redeemed us from slavery. So that's our first commandment. Now, Abraham Joshua Heschel, who you've all heard the name, a 20th century theologian, one of Victor's teachers, reframed this commandment not as a mystical claim, just God is, but a call to relationship. So Heschel described God as a challenge, not an abstraction, a being to whom we humans are accountable, and in whose dreams and designs we are invited to participate. For Heschel, this first utterance, this first commandment, requires of us not just that we believe in this God, but that we respond to this God. Right? And then in more modern interpretations and readings of this, there are those who read it as a community-forming declaration. They liken the 10 Commandments to a mission statement. And the first commandment is the founding premise that gives all others their authority and unites us around a shared purpose. So when Victor said to you last week that the 10 utterances were unique to the Jewish people, while the Noahide laws were for everyone, the laws given to Noah are for everyone, the whole world, but this is what makes it unique, is if you count this as the first commandment, then it uniquely is speaking to those who were redeemed from slavery. But when you simply state, I am the eternal your God, and you shall have no other gods before me, then then it's a universal statement. Then it's an inclusive universal statement. But we place, you shall have no other gods before me, as the second commandment. The second commandment then is a more expanded version. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself a sculptured image or any likeness of what is in the heavens above or on the earth below or in the waters under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or serve them. For I, Yud-He-Vav-He, the eternal, your God, am an impassioned God, or sometimes we can say it, a jealous God, visiting the guilt of the parents upon the children, upon the third and upon the fourth generations of those who reject me, but showing kindness to the 1,000th generation of those who love me and keep my commandments. So this is a mouthful, and it's a really, wow, you can have no other gods before me because I'm jealous. I'm a jealous God, right? Or I'm a passionate God that that loves for the 1,000th generation those who love me, but those who reject me, not only they, but also their offspring up to the 4th generation are going to feel my wrath. So now the phrase before me, al panai, lo yihye lecha od Elohim acherim al panai, it says, means literally in my presence. No other gods in my presence, which is everywhere, because God is present in all places, in all realms, at all times. Therefore, there's no place where idolatry can be permissible. So this having no other gods before me is really, our focus is on the idolatry. What is idolatry? So first of all, you see that this extended commandment speaks both to the making of idols and the worshiping of idols. Both are forbidden separately. So to show us how thorough is the Torah's intention to uproot idolatry at every stage, at the making and at the worshiping, right? So I want to tell you that the fear of breaking this commandment severely limited art and artistic expression in the Jewish world for ages, right? We weren't supposed to create images of anything, any likeness of a human or animals or of fishes. So think about it. The fish is an important symbol in Christianity, right? Animals were symbols and of the gods in so many other of the ancient pagan religions, right? And so we couldn't do any of that. Many, many years ago, when Victor and I had a congregation in Los Angeles and we built an ark, a Torah ark, like the one that we have at Shepherd of the Hills, only this one was built into the wall. And typically, when you open the doors, then there's a veil, a curtain. It's called a parochet. And one of our members, who was an amazing artist, a beautiful artist, and he made beautiful tapestries. He created the parochet for this ark. And our theme was, in your light we see light. It was in Hebrew there. And he had this beautiful image of a burning bush in the middle and and he had in the corner a human dancing joyfully. And there were people in our congregation who questioned whether it was okay to put that beautiful tapestry in front of the Torah because there was a human image on it. Of course, Victor and myself, the thing hung in our ark, because we also followed some of the more modern interpretations. Franz Rosenzweig, a 20th century philosopher, argued that idolatry is fundamentally a matter of worship and attitude, not just of objects. right? Meaning that images are not intrinsically idolatrous if they're not created with that intention, if they're not made to be something that we worship, but that also there are modern substitutes that are just as dangerous, right? The Torah scroll. Some people treat the Torah scroll like an idol. Victor and I have a lot of issues around that, right? What can we do to recognize that the Torah scroll represents and carries, it's the carrier wave for the wisdom and the word of the words of Torah and the wisdom that's in Torah, but it's not in and of itself an idol, even though the way we treat it sometimes cuts very close, very close. Right? We understand today idolatry as the worship of anything that we place above all else, whether it's the state, whether it's money, whether it's power, not because any of these things in and of themselves are bad or evil or wrong, but because when we elevate them above all else, that constitutes the same spiritual error as idol worship in the ancient days. Right? So, how many people in our world, in our country, in our leadership, worship the God of Mammon, right? Right. The more money, the happier we are. Right? That's idolatry. That's how we interpret idolatry. And we have begun to see a loosening of that concern about images, but you won't see images of in synagogues very often of people or animals, or you won't see that. You'll see other beautiful art. So the third one, the last one I want to get to is, you shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. We've all heard that one, right? But the full statement says, you shall not take the name in vain or swear falsely by the name of Yud-He Vav-He, your God, for God will not clean one who swears falsely by that name. In other words, you swear falsely by God, God does not forgive you. God does not cleanse you of that. So the primary violation in our older commentaries is swearing a false oath using God's name, promising something true. I swear to God, that I will get that to you by whatever date, I will pay you back, and then you don't. So, because they understood it as a desecration of God's name. When we desecrate God's name, we're undermining the moral fabric of our communal life, right? And note that this is the only commandment in the Decalogue that explicitly states God will not hold guiltless the violator. God will not cleanse the violator. So, signifying how really severe this is. So in our thought, because God has no physical presence, God's name is, in a sense, God's embodiment. Also because words create reality. Words are, so the name of anything contains the essence of that thing. So the name of God is God's embodiment. So that means that any act that diminishes God's name, not just a verbal oath, not just I swear to God, right, fall under this prohibition. Right? We have a concept of chilul Hashem, the desecration of God's name, and we connect this to that concept, so that And it's a concept in our daily ethical lives. So speaking or acting in ways that bring disgrace on God, on the Jewish people, on humanity, hypocrisy, dishonesty, cruelty done by those who claim to be religious, those are all treated as violations of this commandment. So, summing up, a common thread across the older commentators is that these first three commandments move from the existence, establishing who God is and that God is, to exclusivity, that there are no substitutes for that God, to honor, how God's name is to be treated with reverence in speech and in deed. And a more common modern impulse is to move these three commandments from the realm of just ritual compliance to the sphere of existential and ethical responsibility, asking not just, are we worshiping correctly, but what are we truly giving our ultimate loyalty to? And does our speech reflect honest relationship with the divine? So that's what I have to share with you. And I think Reb Victor and Pastor Phil and Pastor Janet might have some things that they want to add.
I'll go very briefly into my dear Nadia. And um, when I wrote my doctoral dissertation on Heschel, I had to justify to a secular university that he wasn't a theologian alone, that he also contributed to what we know as philosophy. And so one of the ways that I did it was to point out that in many ways, modern philosophy could be attributed to the beginning period with the giant French philosopher Descartes. And Descartes described us, all of us, with what became known as the cogito. Cogito ergo sum. We think, and therefore we are. That we are thinking human beings or animals, actually, the way he put it. I described Heschel based upon what he was saying about this commandment was, and I had to put it in Latin, respondio ergo sum, that we are human only to the extent that we respond in the world. Other than that, we're just kind of a blob. All right. So that's really important to understand that it is these three commandments are not passive commandments. All right. Acknowledging God and recognizing that there is no other God. And this particular God that I acknowledge is the redeeming God who took us out of the narrow places, which is what in Hebrew the word for Egypt, Mitzrayim, means, is that all people can be redeemed from the narrowness of their constricted consciousness to expanded consciousness through the embrace of God. And the only other one that I wanted to mention is that the whole thing about you shall not take the name of God uh, in vain. That's one of the reasons why when you go into court and you witness, and witnessing in Jewish tradition is a very, very important, significant event. And so it's superscribed with all sorts of concerns about witnessing, and it all boils down to truth telling. So, in many ways, you can look at that commandment, you shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. You've seen it enough on television. If you've had the unfortunate experience of testifying in court, you are asked to raise your hand, right hand, God knows why, only God knows why, and swear on a text We usually assume that it's a Bible, but um, you can do it on the Islamic holy text. You can do it on the Buddhist, but you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth. So help me God. All right. That's another meaning. That's kind of the down to earth. You cannot, lying is taking God's name in vain. So that's just what I want to add.
Okay, I would go next. I came across something that I wanted to share with you that I thought was just kind of interesting. That there is a term we think of God as being monotheistic, as Rev Nadia was talking earlier, and there was a window of time in the eighth, ninth century BC that concept of devotion to a single primary God was certainly there, but there was also an acceptance of the existence or the possible existence of other deities. And over time, that evolved, particularly as we get into the um, Pharisaic kind of world of Judaism where that just disappears altogether. There is no acknowledgement of that, and it's the same within Christianity. But so there, my point is that there is an evolution, a change of understanding of God along the way, and how we interpret that into our lives. There was I came across a commentary on this particular passage. And yeah, it talked about Yahweh's demanding solidarity against Pharaoh. So this is where this story really takes hold. Where and as we kind of look back at that, Moses has a unique relationship with God. I mean, Moses is handed these commandments. He has this almost like this personal relationship with God that is beyond that we would normally think out of faith. And in and it kind of brings us to a place of mystery, right? I don't, when I sit in prayer, I don't have a voice that I hear responding to my prayer, right? There's a bit of a mystery in our faith in God. And we expect that mystery. I had a quote here: we expect a mystery to be amorphous and transcendental, but we expect a demand to be visible and political. So, in these three utterances that Reb Nadia was just talking about, Yahweh is indeed holy mystery, who in the very utterance of mystery enunciates demand. So there's this thing where I can't reach out and touch. I can't I can't go to somebody who doesn't share my faith or my belief and simply say, well, just go 2 blocks down and turn right and you'll see, something. It is something that comes from the heart and something that you convey by action. You live that out. It builds in your heart. And I wanted to share that this evening because these first three commandments, these first few commandments that talk about our relation with the presence, the existence of God. As Nadia said, I'm going to steal from you the existence, the exclusivity, and the honor that we bring to God. Is it has been challenged along the way, yet even in our faith traditions, as different as they may be, they center around this very basic concept. And I wanted to add just a real quick story here. when I am doing my Bible studies, I think I'll hold this up. You can see I've marked different places and I've written all over the place, notes from classes and stuff that I would write into it. And I was in teaching a class in Minnesota, and I had opened my Bible, and it was a Bible a different one that I used in the New Testament for an exam, and we were allowed to write in it. So I had writings all over the place. And there was a woman there who found that abhorrent, that you do not, um, you, I don't know what the right word is, you don't add anything to the Word of God in these pages. And following that, if a Bible is sitting on the table, whether it is a Christian context or Jewish context, you would never cover it. You never put anything on it. It is sacred. So we get into this kind of mix as we look at these first three commandments and how we understand God. And I guess I would challenge you, as I think Reb Nadia had some questions that she was going to share with you shortly, that you take that into consideration with the way you were brought up, the experiences that you had, and how you understand I guess, holiness of this text. So, Janet?
All right. Yeah, thank you, everybody, for that beautiful build-up and insight already. I would have to say that one of the things I'm so thankful that God has brought me to a place where I have the opportunity to engage in friendship and deep love and learning with our rabbis and with the Pardes Levavot community. And I have to say that I think if it were not for that relationship, I would never have known about the first commandment as Reb Nadia shared with us, because I did not learn that ever until I started engaging in this relationship. And I see Mara not, saying the same thing. And it's interesting because even though I did not learn that, I feel as though I've always known it. And I don't know where I learned it. I was baptized and confirmed in the Methodist Church. And in that church, the first three commandments are: 1, you shall have no other gods before me; 2, you shall not make idols; and 3, you shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. So it still leaves out that first part, but it has the other two. Moving into ministry and through the candidacy process and joining the Lutheran Church, there we have the first commandment is you shall have no other gods, and the second commandment, you shall not misuse the name of your God. And then the third commandment moves on to the Sabbath day. And so it was just really interesting to me to understand, have that self-understanding that I always knew there was something other. And it really struck me, and so much so that it kind of struck fear into me as I was going through my candidacy process in Southwestern Minnesota Synod. And we have 3 parts to our candidacy. You go through an entrance interview where you are interviewed, you write kind of the story of your faith life, and you're interviewed by a panel of people. Then you move into endorsement, which is where you've gone through you're in seminary, you're nearing the end of it. They want to know if you've learned what you need to know in order to preside and do the things that you're going to be asked to do and trusted to as a pastor. And then there's the final approval, where they just kind of give you the stamp of approval. And you are at that point are ready for ordination. And I remember it was at my endorsement interview, and my bishop, John Anderson, was one of the people on the panel that was interviewing me. And I was ready for the red check mark saying, give her the boot, she's out, because I remember him asking me this question: Janet, as you move into ministry, what would you tell others about Jesus? And why would you tell them that Jesus matters in their lives? And I paused and I said, Bishop, I think we've skipped a step here because we haven't talked about God. And the first thing I would want to talk to them about is, what do you know about God? How is God present in your life? Because I think it's pointless to talk to anyone about Jesus who does nothing but point to God without first knowing something about God. And I remember it coming out of my mouth, and I sat there and I thought, they're going to boot me for sure. And instead, yeah, Bishop John looked at me and he was like, wow, thank you for that. I think you're good to go. And so there's that kind of, you know how you know things? And I think we talked about this in Bible study this morning. You know how you know things, but you don't know how you know them? And so I have to think that there's this innate center, this beginning point in each of us where God dwells, because we are created in the image of God and for the likeness of God, that it's present. It's just a matter of it somehow being released. And so that's, I think, just the beauty of these commandments, as Nadia talked and Victor talked and then Phil talked. That's kind of what it's all about. It's living that relational aspect of who God is. Because, you know, when I think about even as a child, when both of the commandments that I learned, you shall have no other gods. And they, neither of them were before me. I guess the Methodist one was before me. But no other gods? Well, who are you then? So I love that language of I am. And we think about God being all things, for all people, for all creation, for all time. Thank you.
I just want to mention to note when this Decalogue, the Utterances, was issued. It was after the redemption, after going out of Egypt. So God reminds them and instructs them, and that, hey, you guys just got over hundreds of years of slavery. You just got redeemed because, in effect, I went to Moses and told him to go to Pharaoh and tell them to let my people go. So Abraham knew God. Isaac and Jacob and Sarah, Rebecca and Leah and Rachel all knew God, but it was all individualized experiences of God. This is the first time that a group of people experienced God. So that's why that first utterance may well be the most important one. Because if you don't ascribe to the first, the rest of it is irrelevant to you. All right. And it is for a people, and by extension, all people. All right. So abiding by it is only buying into the recognition that you acknowledge him or her. Yeah.
Them.
Yeah.
Thank you for
Them.
that. Yes.
Her.
Wow. Thank you, everybody. What a great introduction, and hopefully lots of things for you to think about. We're going to send you off into dyads, into breakouts with two each. And these are the questions that I'm suggesting you consider, but of course your conversation will be what did you hear just now that is new or different from what you knew before? And how have these first three utterances influenced your life before this evening? And how do you feel about them now? So consider those questions. Consider whatever else is up in your heart after you've listened. And please accept the invitation to the breakout rooms. You'll have 20 minutes to share, and then we'll come back and hear from everybody and glean all the wisdom that has arisen this evening. Wow, welcome back, everybody. We hope you had some interesting, far-ranging, wild conversation, as did we, and we'd love to hear from you. What how you responded to those questions, or what came up in your conversations that were particularly juicy, or that want to be shared with the whole group, so that we all benefit from the wisdom and from the exploration that you did. Yeah, Dan, it's great to see you.
Hi. Good to be here, and I'm going to listen to the recording from last week too, which I had missed. Um, yeah, I had, as I said in the group, I never really got a handle on what the different readings of the Ten Commandments were in the different traditions. Um, and I also really didn't know that there were different ones even amongst the different denominations of Protestant Christianity. So that's something which is intriguing to me. But it was also new for me, in a sense, the way you describe, Reb Naja, about the first commandment not being preamble, but being really the first principle. Because I've always everybody I think thinks about the Ten Commandments as the things you should and shouldn't do, the sins and blessings, um, and yet the first principle, the first couple principles about this are without them the rest of it doesn't make sense. The And so I really appreciate the way you put that. Now, coming from a non-faith upbringing, not a person of faith. Belief in God, whatever that means, is not a question that I can answer well at all. But so I have to kind of rework a lot of that. So even though this was all real cool, I have to rework all this through my atheism um, to understand it. So I'll leave it at that for now.
Thanks, Dan. Maira, I see your hand.
Yes. So Wayne and I had the pleasure again of sharing our stories, and he asked me which of the commandments was most important to me as a child. And I have to say, this part I didn't say in our room. God wasn't important at all. God wasn't part of the picture when I was a child, just like when Dan was a child. But the first commandment, that I took you out of Egypt, that was what was important. And that's what Passover is about. And that's what is the fundamental part of the tradition. So, our liberation from whatever enslaves us, including my father's Holocaust history, that was the important commandment. And at some point, Naja, I want to ask my disruptive question.
Okay, let's hear from everybody, or give it a little bit more time, and then we'll get your disruptive question, because it's actually a great question. Mary Rita.
Okay, so and I think I did not say this. I was had the joy of being with Fred, and we first just shared a little bit about who we were first, and then jumped in. Um, when I think of the commandments, I'm going to use the commandments because that's how they were introduced. Um, I think of the Baltimore Catechism, and I think of them in a book like that, where these are the rules. These are the rules. And And so I've been, now I think about they're almost like a lattice with, with that a lot of things get, you know, entwined and on them. But tonight it was the word relational that came up. That these words and the first one, especially in the relationship with my Shahina, my God, and the passionate, loving God. Um, but as I look at just the whole, the whole of it, it's also the relational of how I be in oneness with the whole human race and with everybody that I come in contact with and a part of my life. And that is so different than the way I knew them as a little girl, as a Catholic.
Mm.
And so got a lot of chewing on. And Dan, we'll have some good talks. There goes his eyebrow.
Yeah, Lori, go ahead.
I'll piggyback on what Miriam Ruth said. I mentioned last week that, of course, my introduction as a Catholic who is really not so much one now, but the tradition is still there, and some of that runs deep. But I learned as a child the same way that she did. Who made me? God made me, and the whole 9 yards, and everything in this gold book that I can still see before my first communion. And so tonight, I think, and last week, I would have always thought of the Ten Commandments, the 10 utterances, which is, I'm really loving that concept, um, of being able to put it into a relational view instead of a thou shalt not view, or in terms of sin or guilt. I mean, certainly not that those aren't moral precepts, but for example, looking, Reb Nadia, when you talked about the second commandment, in that names are sacred, what I would take away from that tonight would be that everyone's name is sacred, every being is sacred, and of course that we hold God much higher above that than looking at it where I would have traditionally thought, oh, I'm not supposed to swear. Um, it's so much deeper, and I mean, I have to go back and try to take notes on the recordings because I don't have this stuff in writing, and everything has become so deep and so profound and so meaningful that, especially when I'm a couple hours ahead of you guys, I'm not looking at all. To be perfectly honest, like I want to be. Um, and so it's just been really valuable and meaningful. And the group with Dan and Mark, was also that. So I just want to say thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Oh, one last thing. I don't know who else thinks about it, but the whole concept of me for God, has always been personal and loving. And I'm so grateful for that. I have a really hard time on a personal level thinking of God as jealous or vindictive because I haven't been.
Yeah.
Maybe that showed up in my catechism and the fear of God was put in me somewhere, but never in my family. And so I've always been so grateful to just carry away the notion of a very loving God. And so it's really hard to think about it any other way. And I think I'm probably really blessed for that.
Yeah.
Nadia, can I take a second and jump in on what Lori said, just because of a conversation that we had in our group, and that was with regard to the third commandment or third utterance, you shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. And we were talking about, Nadia teaching us that this is the only commandment in the Decalogue that explicitly states God will not hold guiltless the violator. And so then I pointed out to them, and for all of those who have been immersed or introduced to the Christian faith, the teaching of Jesus from the book of Matthew, the 12th chapter, where Jesus states, while all sins can be forgiven, blasphemy against the Spirit will not be forgiven, neither in this age nor in the age to come. So we were talking about how we're drawing an assumption that for Jesus, that was a direct relation. It was very relational to this aspect of the third utterance.
Yeah.
That's what it was speaking to, was blaspheming the Holy Spirit or blaspheming the Spirit, and with taking God's name.
And what's the implication of blaspheming God? Well, in the first utterance, or commandment, however you want to see it, he reminds the people that God is the God who liberated you.
Mm-hmm.
So if you blaspheme God, you reduce that redemptive act to insignificance. And quite frankly, in the history of humanity, that may well be the most precious thing that God ever did. I know that Christianity will say that giving only begotten Son, but from a Jewish perspective, we are reminded everywhere in all our prayers and everything, irrelevant to the prayer, that it is God who took us out of Egypt. Liberation has been the overriding concept and experience of the people. And it inspired, you know, um, civil rights struggle. It inspired slaves in the United States in the 1800s. So, in many ways, to blaspheme God is to remove all, that means that the good God doesn't exist. And so the only thing left to you is to fear something.
Right.
And we've all come to the conclusion that's not the God we really want to embrace.
Yeah, and I think as we talk about, this being the very first one, bringing us all together, this is the first thing that brought us together as humanity, and Victor talked about when the Israelites were being led out of Egypt, and that was the first time that they recognized God as a group or as a unit. And when we blaspheme God, we're injuring or doing damage to the potential positive experience or relationship of God that somebody around us might have.
Yeah.
Because, like Victor said, they don't see the good and gracious God, then they see the punitive, untrustworthy God.
Dan, go ahead.
So, when I think about this, though, um, I go back to what you started in your introduction, the universalist versus the particularism. If the first principle is he redeemed us out of Egypt, then I would think that the rest of all of this follows that these rules, these commandments are for us, not for everybody else. So, and yet the whole concept of monotheism has evolved to be that not just that there's one God for everybody. It's the same God, and whether you want to go with the chosen people or not the chosen people, but this story here is really just about and for us, as opposed to everybody, and that rankles me in terms of the Ten Commandments as
Yep.
being. I always thought that the Ten Commandments, well, that's for everybody, but the rest of the Talmud and all this stuff is for the Jews. But now it really seems that in this interpretation, even the Ten Commandments is really just for us.
Well, in a fundamentalist Jewish interpretation, that's what they would tell you. And it's not what we choose to embrace. It's not what we choose to believe. Um, you'll have to listen to what Victor shared last week, Dan, to get a little bit more context for that. But you've got to keep in mind that these utterances, these are uttered to, the Israelite people who are standing there at the foot of the mountain after they've recently been redeemed from slavery. So, I would argue God is introducing God's self. Hey, everybody, I'm the one who redeemed you.
It's okay.
Now listen up, right? Now pay attention. So that was in that moment, it was necessary to introduce God's self in that way as one, who acted in that way for them. But that doesn't mean for eternity that these utterances are meant only for the Israelite people. That would be the way I would choose to interpret it.
In fact, Dan, last week when you listened to it, I talked about a place in the New Testament where um, parts of the Ten Commandments are used. It's not the first three that we are discussing, but several of the others. I think there are half a dozen. So there's a reference, and it's almost in that text. It is almost as if Jesus is talking to this man that is taken for granted that surely everybody knows this, right? And and Jesus was Jewish. I mean, I have to remind myself because of the studies. So were his disciples. They were all Jewish. So, these paths, you just can't separate. You can't separate Christianity from Judaism. You just can't do it because the relationship is there.
Yeah.
But listen to last week was a good session, particularly was. I
Well,
mean,
I
I'm
apologize.
biased, but
No,
Yeah.
no. I mean, one has to ask oneself, is it the Jews in Louisiana who are clamoring to have uh, some framed version of the Ten Commandments in every classroom? No. In effect, it's been adopted as a universal thing. Now, there's another way to word it to make it more universal. So and this is the way I experience it in my life. And that is that God announces in that first utterance that God is the Redeemer. So let's put it in a strange way. Abraham Lincoln and the forces of the North redeemed this country from slavery. All right? Not Jews, God. That's the most important thing. All right? And 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 that presence of the liberation story of the centrality of God as Redeemer has inspired nations to overthrow colonialism in the 20th century. It's an incredible. I mean, if I were to ask people, you got to take an oath to something, I'd say take an oath to acknowledging redemption as a possibility. All right. And the force flows from that acknowledgement of God because we, even the Marxists, God bless Karl, who said that we're all in chains. All right. Now, he thought that a different economic system would release us from bondage. I'm not going to argue yes or no with that, but liberation from our human chains is the human story, unfortunately. And fortunately, some people get redeemed by effort. All right? It's powerful. But I appreciate the confusion about the particularism
Yeah.
that, yeah,
That's why I pointed to it. I think it's
yeah.
important to acknowledge it. And then, you know, we don't have to buy it. Um, Anybody else want to share something from your breakout rooms? Because Meira has a very juicy question that I want her to be able to ask and for us to all wrestle with. Um, but I don't want to shut down any conversations that happened in your breakouts that might want to be shared with us. Fred.
Howdy. So you asked how did today's session change my conception or take
Yeah.
on the and so as a child I was raised by a an atheist and not just an atheist but someone who put the burden of proof on everybody else. So he was a skeptic and he could say, "Oh, that's not true because you haven't proved it." And in my adult life, and I never said it to him because he was very elderly, I would have looked at him and said, "Well, prove to me there's not a God." And that's basically where I'm at, is that I have a nascent faith that I didn't have when I was a kid, or actually, I think I really repressed it. Because if I'd said to my parents, I prayed to God today, they would have, my dad would have ridiculed me or at least upbraided me. Or argued with me. So I didn't take the Ten Commandments. I wasn't in a place of faith as a child, although I think I believed in God when I was young. I remember that, but I think it got kind of drummed out of me. And so now I have this nascent faith as an old guy, and so I'm reading these in that context, and that's a whole different experience. And yeah.
Wow. Thanks, Fred. Yay. Yay, you. Yeah. Good. So, Maira, do you want to drop that question on this group?
Yes, I will drop this question. Okay, so the Israelites are liberated and they go to Sinai, where they have a group synesthesia event that Reb Victor told us about last week. And then they receive the Ten Commandments or the Ten Utterances, and the first batch gets shattered. And we also know in the Jewish creation story in Kabbalah that the first time the vessels of creation are made, they get shattered. So, what do we make of this shattering? What are we supposed to learn from this?
I have a question, and I'm trying to decide where in scripture I heard it or if I've only thought it. But I thought that Moses went back up the mountain to God and got a new set. That
Yes. Oh,
Exactly.
no. Yes,
He got a
absolutely.
second set.
yeah,
The
I'm
first
just
set was shattered. The first set was shattered, just like in our creation myth, the first creation was shattered. And I want to know, and yes, then they were redone. And I want to know, what do we glean from that?
First, there's an awful lot of brokenness. All right. That's the first lesson. Mary Rita has another lesson.
Well, this zeroes in right on like the two psalms that I have been like praying the last 2 days, and one of them invited me to to hold my wounded heart. And then yesterday was, and both of these psalms, these chants were written by Rabbi Shefa, and the other one refers to the Japanese, ritual of mending the brokenness and the beauty of that. And so when I think about the shattering, there's something about there's something about the growing that happens that brings like the pieces of who I am back together, and that's part of the journey. And good old Leonard Cohen, the way the light gets in is through the cracks. I need those cracks too, because they help me to see the world differently and to see myself differently.
yeah.
There's more
Thank
than
you.
that, but that's what's coming up now. And it's like, I want to go back to these Psalms and just sit with them tonight.
Thanks, Mary Rita.
When Mahara talked about that, the thing that evoked for me was the potential that exists in keeping the broken pieces intact. And I think about the times in my life where it's become just completely broken, and I thought there was no potential for anything beautiful to come from it. And so, kind of piggybacking on what you're saying, Mary Rita, but for those pieces to be assembled in a new and a different way, that's just beautiful. and knowing that they might still be shattered yet again, or probably will be. So to me, it was all about the potential for something new. And that's, and for humanity, especially.
It's beautiful. Dan, go ahead.
Yeah, and piggybacking on that, I would say that both shatterings can be thought of as the beginning of the story, not the end. That
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
the shattering, like Pastor Janet was saying, the potential for what's to come to putting everything back together, and the shattering of the tablets. Well, that didn't end the story, and everybody walked away, and Moses didn't walk away. He said, "Well, we're going to have to try again." And we're going to do this. And if I remember the story correctly, they brought the first set, the shattered pieces, with them in the Aron. They didn't just leave them there and take the new fresh tablets, but they brought the new and the old. So from a potential point of view, and from that it's part of our story too.
So they also ground up the first tablet and put it in water and made the Israelites drink from it. And that was the punishment for violating the building the golden calf. But here's another question.
That's a midrash, Dan. That's a
Yes,
midrash.
Yeah,
yeah,
that
and
yes.
I'll throw this out to Meira. How do you know that what's written on the second one was the same as the first? You don't exactly.
We
All
don't.
right.
We don't.
That's what Mark was saying, that it's all interpretation.
We don't know
Moses,
that it was exactly the same, and we
Yeah,
have two different versions in Tanakh.
That's right.
Yeah.
that's right too.
Next
Yeah.
week we'll look at that because the next week we're going to look at the fourth commandment or the fourth utterance, which is remember the Sabbath. And and as we look at that particular one, it shows up differently in Exodus and in Deuteronomy, and makes for some very juicy ways of interpreting and understanding the Sabbath. So we'll be looking at that next. Right, next is the Sabbath. Then after that, Phil is going to introduce the honoring our parents. That will be the week after. And then in the last week, we're all going to deal with all the do nots. Um, one of the things that came to me just now, Maira, is in my grandmother's teachings, there is no perfection. There is no perfection. There's only perfecting. We're always improving on. We're always growing toward that ideal, perhaps. But there is no perfection, and somehow that idea that even these incredibly impactful, meaningful, important acts of God. Because remember, the first set of tablets, we're told, God inscribed. And the second set, God dictated and Moses inscribed, right? Which is how we know that it's not the same as the first, because, there was human interpretation. There was but somehow the fact that these things that God ostensibly created can be broken, can is permission to not be perfect myself. And that's actually very reassuring.
And
Mm-hmm.
liberating.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. It's like that foreshadowing that we will break them, but God won't abandon us in our breaking of them.
Thank you, Pastor Janet.
yeah. Well, thank you, all of you. Thank you for your curiosity and for your offerings and for your presence. Um, do we have yes, Mary Rita?
Well, I was just thinking, and Janet, okay, our newest kitty is it. Well, both of them were rescues, but Motek, who's really a sweetie, was really abandoned emotionally by his original owners. And there's something. He's just an amazing, loving, funny, kitty. Like I look at he was so broken. I think when when he was rescued, and love is the answer. Love is and I think we're all broken, which we said just a little bit earlier, and and it's just like may we realize that uh, I that God longed to love us, and I think longed to love us and to bring us, you know, to not make us perfect again. I love what you said about softest teaching, Nadia, but that we are always like growing and moving toward.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right. Well, thank you. What a wonderful summation. And yeah, I want to bless you all to continue to wrestle. That's ultimately, what we are, what we have the opportunity to do, to wrestle with these words, to wrestle with these concepts. And may they really bring all of us closer to each other, closer to our faith, closer to whatever that thing is that we call God. And we'll see you next week. Same time, same bat channel. And
Amen.
have a blessed week, everyone.